Hey, my name's David. Thanks for checking out our Love is a Verb series. Don't forget you can give online at 828church.com/give or through the 828 Church app. Hope you enjoy this message.
Good morning. Good morning. All right, well, my name is Leah, and I'm part of the staff team here at 828 Church, the executive pastor, and I'm going to kick us into week 2 of Love is a Verb, but I won't be here the whole time. Ron's going to catch the other half of the message. But as we've been talking about Love is a Verb, this story came up, and I really wanted to share, and I feel like it's God for us this morning, so I'm going to do that. But before I do, yesterday I was thinking, I was reading about another word that's kind of like love. So love can be a noun, love can be an adjective, love can be a verb, an adverb, all those things, but there's another word that can do that also, and it is barbecue. Because you can make barbecue, you can barbecue something, and then you can have barbecue-flavored chips. So you can do all those things with the word barbecue, and you can put them in the same sentence and say, I love Texas barbecue, because Tex makes excellent barbecue. So this is your English lesson for this morning, but we're going to kick into week number 2 in the Love is a Verb series, and I'm going to share a little bit just about how God chased me and his crazy love for us. We're going to sing about his crazy love later towards the end of service. But so as we were preparing, as we kind of just were here at church during the week and we talk about ideas, what God's teaching us, and love is a verb, this story about how my parents showed me God's love, his proactive, his protective love, really bubbled up to the top of my heart. And so I'm going to share it with you. So this is high school Leah. This story takes place. And I grew up in the D.C. area, specifically in D.C., in downtown D.C. My dad was a police officer, so in the 80s, when you were a police officer, if you lived in the city, they gave you a police car. So he got to bring home his cruiser, and he worked there for 25 years and then retired. And then my mom is an elementary school principal. And so I had 2 parents that were very protective because they've seen a lot on both ends of the spectrum. And so since I had proactive and protective parents, that meant I had a couple of things to keep me safe. I had a curfew. There was a time I had to be home, and you better be there. And I had just a set of things. I wasn't quite locked away in a tower, but kind of close. And they loved me a lot. My mom was actually very spiritually protective. I would find her on the couch in the morning, reading her Bible, praying over us. And I just know that I've been covered in a lot of ways. And I know that's not everyone's story, but it leads into what we're talking about this morning. And so high school Leah, I was in the middle, the story picks up in the middle of a bunch of bad decisions. So you know how you make one bad decision, and you forget your raincoat, and then you're wet, and you make another bad decision? Okay, not those kind of decisions, but I was making some bad decisions. I had made one, and I made another, and then I had to lie about that one, and then I made another one. So I'm way down this road of bad decisions on this Friday night in high school, and it's just unfortunate. So I find myself on a Friday night, an hour past curfew, which is not good, and I hadn't even called and said that I was going to be late. I find myself in a lie because I had said I was going to go one place, and I'd gone to another place. And then I find myself, as I go to actually head home, that I go to my parking spot, and the car is not there. I'm like, I can't even get home to be in trouble. I'm stuck here. And so my car had been towed. It was at a place where you had to have a parking pass to park there, and I didn't know. So the sign says $90 in cash at the impound yard. You have to go. I called the phone number on it. I don't have $90 in cash, nor do I have a friend that's going to go drive me to get my car. And so I'm sitting here okay. Have you ever found yourself at a spot, maybe physically or maybe emotionally or maybe just even spiritually, where you're like, I'm down this road. I did not intend to be here. This is the last thing I was intending to be. I certainly didn't intend to get caught. And and you know what? No, despite as far as we go down those roads, you're never too far for God to get you. And so I call my dad. He's sitting on the couch in his spot where he always is, and he answers, where are you? Okay, I'm coming. I'm going to have to sit there and wait till he gets me. So he picks me up. It's quiet the whole way home. But he got me, and we went home. Next morning rolls around, and I forgot to mention that this was before GPS. It's not like I told him the address, and he just popped it in. He had to use a map. He had never been where I was. I had never been where I was, and came and found me. And you know what? He came to find me because it was important for my safety, but also God comes to find us because it's important for our hearts. Like, not only for our physical safety, but he chases after our hearts. And he wants to protect our hearts from hurt and destruction. So the next day we wake up, and it's still pretty quiet. He's like, let's go get your car. He's got the $90 in cash, and even though I did have a job at the time, I actually worked at Godiva, the chocolate store. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's delicious. And I gained 10 pounds my first month there. But it was the best job because everybody was happy when they came in. They're getting chocolate. And so even though I had a job, I didn't have $90 in cash that morning. So Dad's got the money, and we go get the car. And that really just reminds me of Jesus in a big way because Jesus paid a debt we could never pay. So the sin that separated us from him, being able to be in his presence, we could never pay that. It's not $90. It's a whole lot more than that. He paid it with his life. And Jesus is awesome that way. So when it finally came time for Dad and I to talk about it, it felt like forever. It was probably just a few days where it was quiet. And here's a few things that he said to me. He said, I trusted you, and I expected you to make better decisions, and I'm disappointed. I was like, crushing. From my heart, at least. But it was all in love. Like, he wasn't trying to, break me down. And God is amazing because he can be disappointed in our decisions, but he's not disappointed in the person he created us to be and who we're going to grow into. He'll never be like, I'm so disappointed with you, I'm done with you. He cares. And he doesn't love all of our decisions, but he does love us like crazy. And there was one more thing my dad said. Like I said, my mom was the one that really talked to us more about spiritual stuff. She's the one that made me memorize the verse, be sure your sin will find you out, which came true that day. I like to say that the Holy Spirit's a tattletale. Always tattle on me. I can't get away with anything. But here's what my dad said to me that morning. He said, God cares about you too much to let you get that far. And so even though this was my kind of first little strand of bad decisions, God caught me in the beginning. He didn't want me to get that far. God cared about my heart. He cares about your heart so much. He doesn't want to let you go down 10 roads until you're the person that you just never were meant to be. And the Bible's awesome because it shows us that the whole way through that he cares about us that much. And I want to share a verse, Romans 8, verse 38 through 39. And so this crazy love that God loves us with, that's proactive, that's protective, nothing can separate us from it. Verse 38, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present or the future, or any powers, neither height nor depth or anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. No distance, heart-wise, physical distance. My parents live 6 hours away. It's not too far for my dad to love me, and there's certainly nowhere too far for our Heavenly Father to love us. He loves us with a crazy love.
Awesome. Thank you. And if you're not aware, Leia's actually on our teaching team. So occasionally she'll carry the entire Sunday morning preach. But as she said, we were just chatting through some of this week's thoughts and message. And that story kind of was something that she was thinking about. And I was like, wow, you should share that. So thank you. And today we're actually looking at the reality in this series, Love is a Verb. We are certainly talking about the fact that, although like barbecue, it can be used a lot of different ways. In the chasing Jesus context, the love we have for him and others does require action, hence the sermon title. But the truth is, until we allow God to love us well, we're not going to be able to live his love the way that we're meant to in our world. I mean, it's just a challenging thing for us to be able to do. And in fact, the Bible says in 1 John 4:7, and we're coming from 1 John 3 and 4, a lot in this series, Ray. But basically, John said this, dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. So today we're going to focus kind of on that. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. So for us to be able to love the way we're meant to love out or live out the action of love, then we've got to live into the love that God has for us. And the first point Leia made for us is that God's love protects us. Beautifully true. proactively protects us. Like, doesn't just protect us when we get in a situation, but God's out there ahead of it, giving us some wisdom and insight so we don't necessarily have to make a series of bad choices. Of course, we all understand that often we do. We often find ourselves in places and spaces, as Leah said, we never meant to be. And even then, when that happens, God's still going to find us, right? And we'll come back to that at the end. But not only does God's love proactively protect us, but it changes us. Isn't it amazing that the statement that Leah's dad made to her, Mel, ultimately kind of impacted the way she would think as she continued to grow, and that's been true for us too. So God's love doesn't just rescue us from our bad decisions, but it changes the way we think so that we can make different, come on somebody, different decisions. Paul said that when he wrote to the Romans and said that we are literally transformed. Our thinking gets transformed. Our minds are renewed when we surrender who we are to God. And that's an amazing thing. God's love, I'll say it again, God's love will change you. And we know that certainly when someone loves us, there's something really empowering when someone loves us and cares about us from the human perspective. But I would say to you that in the end, only God's love can really change the human heart. Like, we're even the best and healthiest kinds of earthly relationships we can have can't actually change our hearts. If you've ever cared deeply about someone and you wanted them to change and you tried to change them, how'd that work out? Right? But let's be honest, apply that even to your own journey, right? Naomi, when I try to change me, I can't even change me. Like, how am I supposed to change somebody else? It takes God, specifically God's love, to do that. In a time when people of God in the Old Testament had rebelled against God, and we see that in the narrative pretty consistently. Like, they didn't just mess up a time or two, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was a pattern. And we all can relate. So we'll just leave that there, right? But it was a pattern. And the prophet Ezekiel was speaking for God to the people who were lost and broken. And there was a lot of really strong things that he said. There were a lot of stiff and stern corrections that he gave. But ultimately, he wanted to encourage them that, hey, there's still restoration in your future if you'll choose the path of restoration. And he spoke through Ezekiel, and he said this in Ezekiel 36:26. He says this to the people. He says, I will give you a new heart. Here's what God will do. Here's how God's love works. He said, I'll literally give you a new heart. I'll put a new spirit in you. I'll take out your stony, stubborn heart. Come on, somebody. Anybody got a little bit of a stubborn heart sometimes? It can be a redemptive quality. We like to say, yeah, man, we got the determination of a pit bull. That's fine unless you're biting the wrong bone. You know what I'm saying? Like, let go. Right? Okay. That was pretty good. I'll take out your stony, stubborn heart, and I'll give you a tender, responsive heart. That's what we want toward God. We want a tender, responsive heart. I know for some of us, we feel like we've been hurt, so we've kind of become a little bit hard-hearted as a protection. Easy for you to say. But the reality is that doesn't protect us. It only keeps us from the healing that we can find when we look to God. I'll give us that as the takeaway, just so we won't forget that God's love is the only force that can actually change the heart. And if we stopped right here and went old school church, which I would enjoy doing if we had the time, when I just said, hey, start popping up those testimonies, there would be so many. Like, I'll just ask it this way, and I'll let you testify by raising your hand. But how many of you, that's what you've experienced? You've experienced the change that God's love can make in your heart. Like, you have seen incredible redemption. Maybe it was an addiction, or it was a brokenness, or it was a depression that just had kind of overtaken you. It was some place where you were just lost and confused, and you felt like maybe you could never find your way. And somehow God's love got to you. I don't know how. But God's love got to you, and you were changed, and your heart was changed. And there again, just so many beautiful testimonies, and I'll make sure you get to hear some of them. Some of them are sitting not just in this church, but in this service, people's lives who've just been incredibly, radically transformed by God. Paul wrote about that to the Ephesians, about how God's love changes us. And he says this, I pray, this is my prayer for us too. Paul said, I pray that from his glorious unlimited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through his Spirit. So whatever you're going through today, this is my prayer for you. This is my prayer for us. Then Christ will make his home in your hearts as you trust in him. Okay, again, I'm going to just pause there for a quick second. Is that anyone's story? Like somehow God empowered you with an inner strength through his Spirit. You knew who it was, Rodney, that gave you that strength. And then because of that, he was able to make his home in your heart as you began to trust in him. And you see the transformation that that can bring. Your roots, he said, will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. How can we stay strong, Joe? We got to sink them roots, right, into the love that God has for us. That's a big deal. If you don't have the right roots, you're not going to bear the right fruit. And some of us are mad at the fruit when the issue is the root. Where are you sinking your root? Because that's the source. That's where the sustenance comes from. Don't be angry about the fruit your life keeps bearing till you're willing to adjust where you're sinking your root, right? What you're going to. Paul's praying this prayer for the Ephesians. He said, and may you have the power to understand, because that's going to be grace too, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, how deep his love is. And it's crazy. Crazy love. Like crazy high, crazy deep, crazy wide, crazy long, unbelievable, all-encompassing. That's what Paul's trying to say here. This all-encompassing love that covers everything. And then he says, may you experience the love of Christ, though, he says, admittedly, it's too great to understand fully. So inasmuch as he's saying, all God's people should be able to understand how deep and high and wide and long, but it's actually too much to fully understand. But as you do, he says, then you'll be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. So how can we be complete, Jules? How can that happen in us? By understanding, at least on some level, how much we are loved. Nowhere else. Incidentally, I think the obvious contrast here is that there's nowhere else we can find that kind of completeness. We only get that by understanding, at least on some level, how much God loves us. God's love, when we see it like that, will change us. God's love protects you, changes you. God's love has chosen you and me. Speaking about all of us, but I wanted this to be specific and personal. God's love has chosen you. Isn't it cool to know that you're chosen by God? I know sometimes we wish we were chosen by some specific person, or maybe chosen for some specific job, or there are all sorts of chosen to win the lottery. I don't know what that is. Like there are a lot of things, but this, I feel like sometimes when we're even trying to help someone, Heidi, understand that they've been chosen by the King of creation, that it's almost like trying to convince someone that they could win the lottery, right? That you could, and I always say when I say that I'm not saying you could win the lottery. I'm saying in a sense you have won the lottery. Turn in your ticket. You know what I'm saying? Because you have been chosen. So choose to be chosen. Understand that God's love has chosen you. When I was a kid, I wasn't the kid that often got chosen, right, for things, particularly in regards to sports, which was what I cared about. I probably did okay with Red Rover or whatever. Send Ronnie right over. Don't call me that. Just reverted to elementary school. Is in elementary school. But I actually really loved sports, Darren, and I was very small, so I didn't often get picked. And the truth was, I wasn't a great athlete, but I was above average athlete, and I loved to play. But because of my size, I didn't often get picked, especially when I was outside my circle of friends. I went to a really small school, so I actually got to play sports there. But literally, how small was I? Well, when I was starting my senior year in high school, I was 17 years old, and I hadn't quite made 5 feet. I was a little under 5, like 4'11", and I hadn't broken 90 pounds yet. And I used to pray that I would get bigger, and now I regret that prayer because I pray that I could get smaller, and it's not working. And there was one particular church camp I used to go to as a kid. You're actually allowed to go to this camp when you were 8. And I have 4 older siblings that went to that same church camp. It only lasted a week. But I was such a homesick kid. We had a really amazing close family, grew up in relative poverty, and we were just kind of a crew. And when my year came to get to go to camp, I didn't want to go. And I feel bad about that at this point, because what I didn't realize was that meant that mom and dad would have 5 days without kids. And they actually had planned a camping trip, and I'm sure I ruined it for them, because it was only one tent. And so there I was. So I feel bad for that. But when I was 9, I did go ahead and go to camp. I mean, my mom was pretty insistent. I wasn't going to mess up their week away that year. And every year when I went, I would cry a little bit. And I always wanted to really play sports, but I rarely got picked. And I remember when I was even in senior high camp. So there was a kids camp, there was a junior high camp, and there was a senior high camp. Even at senior high camp, I got homesick sometimes, kind of cried a little bit. But I didn't say I wanted to go home, but I kind of wanted to go home. This is the 16-year-old version of me, who was very tiny and incredibly cute. Was very cute. But when you're 16, you don't want to be cute. You know what I'm saying? If you're a dude, that's not what you're going for. And I remember, though, the first year that someone actually, they would divide this church camp of about 350 kids into bunches of teams, and we would play basketball, which is my favorite sport, and we would play softball, and the teams would have 25 kids on them or whatever, so you didn't necessarily, it was hard to get to play. A lot of kids didn't want to play. They wanted to run around and, but I wanted in the game, right? And I couldn't ever get chosen until I was 16. And then my counselor, I think he wanted to date my sister, so guess who got to play? You know what I'm saying? Hey, play the advantages. That's all I'm trying to say. Favor ain't fair. I don't know what to tell you. It's probably not good preaching. But I was glad I got to play. And I actually made the all-star team, but sometimes it's just hard, to get a chance. And really, this isn't about earthly things. Maybe you're like me and you've been the last pick before. But can I tell you, as it relates to God, you're the first pick? That's really the whole point of the story, is just to say that to you, to me. My sister, my oldest sister's Down syndrome, said to many of you before, like Wendell, everybody was Mary Jane's favorite. She's with Jesus now, but everybody, now, unlike God, there were some people she just straight didn't like. So she either stiff-armed you relationally, or you were her favorite. Those were the two options. You would have been one of her favorites, and she would have said, "Oh, you're my favorite." That was her response. And she always meant it. You definitely, Coach Kim, would have been her favorite. "Oh, that's my favorite." She would have said, "I'm crazy about her, and she's crazy about me." And that's how God is toward us. Everybody's his favorite. True story. And everybody's his first pick. Peter wrote to the people of God, and we are the people of God. Paul wrote about that in Romans, that we've been grafted in the family of God. And he said this: you're a chosen people. I want to just look at each of you in the face and say, you're chosen. You were chosen. Little Naomi, chosen by God. You're chosen. He chose you. He chose you. He picked you. He picked me. You're a chosen people. You're a royal priest, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. Anybody been called, chosen out of darkness, out of brokenness? We've been chosen out of that. God didn't even just wait for us to get ourselves, let me get myself together. And he was like, okay, they're doing better. I guess I'll choose them, right? They're qualified now. I picked them. No, in our brokenness, in our bondage, in our darkness, he chose us out of the darkness. God picked you. That's powerful. God's love has chosen you. In fact, this is incredibly true. God chose to choose you. And he loves to love you. You weren't a default pick. Well, that's who's left. No, he chose to choose you, and he loves to love you, to pursue your heart even when you're running away. God just loves loving you. It isn't even just that he loves you, but he loves loving you. How do I know that? Because he knew what this was going to be like before he created us. And he did it anyway. Why? Because he loves loving. That defines God, because God is. Y'all be tracking. That's important. 1 John 3:1. See what kind of love the Father has given to us. So what kind of love is it? Well, it's the kind of love that says we should be called the children of God, and so we are. That's how much he loves us. So he didn't just say, yeah, Ron's with me. I mean, he's all right. He's okay. No, he said, that's my son. Like he not only chose me, but he chose to adopt me as his very own, like his son. And you're his daughter, right? That's next level love, right? And I'm not just like, this isn't just one of those people that I care about. No, this is my son. This is my daughter. I'm bringing them as close. He was communicating the closest kind of closeness that he could communicate, the most chosen sort of chosenness that he could communicate. He wanted each of us to know that. And when we walk in that kind of love, it changes everything. The insecurities, the uncertainties, the overwhelming darkness has to succumb to the unbelievable light that we find when we live into the love that God has for us. God's love chose us. And God's love has challenged us. Challenges you. That kind of love. When the series is Love is a Verb, then we think about how we're meant to love. Ooh. That's challenging. Another time in the history of the people of God, actually quite close to the same time that I referenced with Ezekiel, was a time when the prophet Jeremiah came onto the scene. Jeremiah was a young man, and God was speaking these words to Jeremiah to speak to the people of God. And they were challenging, and Jeremiah objected. Ooh, I'm too young for this. Can't be asked to handle this kind of an assignment. And the word of the Lord, instead of just speaking through Jeremiah, spoke specifically to Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was gracious enough to share it with us. Jeremiah 1:5, God said to him, I chose you before I formed you in the womb. I set you apart before you were born. Jeremiah is objecting to what God has said is possible for Jeremiah. And God said, look, I know what I'm doing here. I can relate to that. Years ago, I share this story sometimes when God had first moved Karen and I to Virginia Tech. We came from Louisiana Tech, and we had launched a university ministry there in our mid-20s, and now I was in my early 30s, and we'd gotten a call. Some ministry leaders were wanting to start the same university ministry at Virginia Tech, and we flew out and considered it and prayed about it and felt like that was something that God, Donna, wanted us to do, so we moved out there. And the ministry that we had been leading at Louisiana Tech, I have a pretty colloquial kind of slang, and I can speak in a whole lot of just cryptic kind of conversational languages, and that worked really well in the Deep South, and especially in Louisiana. You don't even have to make sense. I mean, they tell Boudreaux jokes. God, what else do I need to say, right? But I went to Virginia Tech, and I don't know, it felt to me like the relative IQ was just too high for my version of ministry, and I felt like, God, you got the wrong guy. Like, we launched into that ministry, and I would sometimes be sharing with some of the students, and I would feel like the entire time I'm sharing, they're just looking at me like, what is he even saying? I don't understand this guy. Where is he from, you know? And I was telling God all about it one day. I was walking around the drill field at Virginia Tech, which is huge, right, Joe? You know, and I was telling him, I said, God, I should still be in Louisiana. And I'm just certain that I heard you say come here, but I think you made a mistake, right? You ever try to talk to God about his decisions and his choices? Maybe you've done that about the way he's loving you. It's possible. You can't talk him out of loving you, so you might as well give up trying. But anyway, I digress. So I'm walking around and I'm telling God, I said, Lord, if we were still in Louisiana, I mean, we had bought a university ministry center. It was just really growing at that time when we left. It was the most significant growth we had had so far. We were well funded. Then we came, to up the Northeast a bit, and students at Virginia Tech really do come a lot from the Northeast, and it was definitely, I made a mistake when I first got there. I was preaching in a church, and I said that we were from the South, and some gentleman came up to me afterward and said, this is the South. And I said, okay, I'm from a different South. I'm from the deep South. But I'm just having this conversation with God. I'm like, Lord, we were made for somewhere else. And I literally told God, I said, I think you got me mixed up with someone else. I'm not good for this. And I felt like God spoke louder than audible to me, Harrison. And he said, no, you got me mixed up with somebody else. because I can do whatever I want with whomever I want, whenever and wherever I want. God's love will challenge you. Before I formed you in your mother's womb, he said to Jeremiah, let me tell you a little something. Before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. I chose you. I chose you. I set you apart before you were born. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. God's love has challenged us to love. Jesus said in John 15, so he's talking to his own followers and certainly to us. And I love the way the challenge comes with the choosing. And he says this, no longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends. So with this challenge comes this incredible closeness. Like when we accept the challenge to really follow God and live into the love and live out the love of God this way, like we understand that he's chosen us for this, then we get a closeness with him. A closeness with him we can't have any other way. Like you can't know God at the level you can know him when you walk out this calling with him. This closeness only comes with calling and stepping into it. You can know a lot about him and you can know him, but you can't really know him till you step into your potential and purpose. No longer do I call you servants. Servants don't know what the master is doing, but I've called you friends. Judah's super cute. He was here just a few minutes ago in this third service. And he would talk to me the whole time were he to stay in the worship center. So that's not workable yet. He's 2. And he's the cutest dude in that he's definitely quality time and words of affirmation are a couple of his love languages for sure, because when he sees me, he responds like this, like he'll go, Papa! Nobody else does that, by the way. When I show up, not another person in my life or friend circle ever jumps up and down and yells with excitement. And he does it for other people too, for Mimi, for McKinley, Mommy, Daddy. I mean, he gets super excited when he sees people. He don't like to say bye though, right? Bye is not a good gig with him. And he's gotten to where when it's time to go, he'll say, bye friends, right? Super cute. That's how God sees us. He sees us as friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, he says, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should last or abide. There's so much in this. So that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Or in other words, everything you need to be who God made you to be and called you to be, you get from God. Try to live the God life without God, that's going to be an epic fail. But the God life with God, yeah. These things he said, I've commanded you so that you will what? So that you will love one another. God's love protects. God's love changes us. God's love has chosen us. God's love has challenged us. And maybe, in some sense, most significantly, just to come back to where Leah started us out today, God's love will always find you. Maybe you feel like a lot of this can't be true for you because of just how far you feel like you have gotten from God. And maybe for some of us, it's not even so much that you're not like looking good on the outside and you're in church, but there's maybe this thing inside of you that just feels too broken and lost for you to ever find your way to this kind of life in the love that God has for you. And I know sometimes we feel that way. If we don't today, there'll likely be a day when we feel that way, because life has a way of isolating us and causing us to feel like we're too far separated from God. And what I love about God is that his love, I need somebody to bear witness right now, his love will always find you. That same church camp I spoke about earlier, many, many years after I was a teenager in that camp, I was the keynote speaker at that camp. Probably near 20 years later. And I had been, when our kids were small, they went to that camp some. I'd been a counselor and done all sorts of other things. But I got to tell you, when you go back to my teenage years at that camp, if they had voted on this, Christina, I would have been voted the least likely to ever be a keynote speaker at that camp. When they stopped making this kid come to this camp, we're never going to see him again. That would have been the tick that box, because 20 years later, I'm a keynote speaker at this camp. By this time, the senior high camp had 550 kids. And I was speaking. We'd made it to Wednesday, and God had done a lot. And lots of those kids come because their friends bring them or trick them into coming or tell them about, the sports and fun times or whatever, but maybe have no history with God or whatever. And I was just trying to address the reality that I'm addressing with you in this moment, that God's love will always find you. And I was coming from Matthew chapter 18, verse 12, where Jesus chose to tell a story, amazing story, about a shepherd who had 100 sheep. Right? Some of you are starting to know the story. And he said that this shepherd got back to the corral, if you will, the sheepfold, and counted the sheep as they came in, and he only had 99. He was missing one. Now, I don't know where you land on this, but if I get 99 out of 100 on anything, I'm what you call happy. That's a percentage I can live with, right? But Jesus was concerned about the one, and that was the story. And I was telling that story at this church camp to these kids, like I'm telling it to you now. And Jesus said that shepherd went, and he went looking for that one lost sheep, because that's what love does. Love goes looking. And in the case of God's love will always find you. And he found that sheep. Now, again, good that I wasn't the shepherd. First of all, I would have been happy with 99. Second, I would have given the one sheep lots of grief, right? I would have been like, what are you doing in a bramble bush? There's not even any food in there. And didn't you see us leaving? Like all 99 sheep were walking away. You didn't notice that? Like, what were you doing? Come on, man. Right? I've been kicking that sheep in the bum, as it were. Probably we need that from God a little bit. Maybe we get that too. I'm not sure. Not in this story. I think I would have grabbed that sheep by the nape of the sheep neck. Right? Get in there and don't get out anymore. No, that's because I love you. Which is true. But that's not even how this story goes. When Jesus found the sheep, the one lost sheep, he took it and he picked it up and he carried it in his own arms or on his own shoulder. I was telling that story like I'm telling it now. And I did a little research before I got there to preach. I was looking at the world population at the time. I checked last night. I like to do this occasionally. It's growing every second significantly. In fact, last night, Ray, as of 9:16 p.m., there was 7,766,261,900, and I waited for it, 99. It was at 9:16. We had 999 on the planet. Did something similar to that night at that camp, and I was counting. I started somewhere around 80, counting up to, I said there's, at that time it was 6 billion something, but 7,766,261,990, there you are, and 91, I see you, and there's 993, 92, 93, 94, and I counted. I actually ran down amongst these 550 kids, and I was running between the rows. And I got probably halfway the back on the left side, remember specifically, and I got to 998, 999, and then there was this one young lady that I zeroed in on, and I said, 100. Whew. There you are. And her face just melted. I don't know why. I didn't know why. I went on, wrapped it up, gave a response. She came to the front. A lot of kids came to the front. She gave her life to Jesus. I didn't know she hadn't previously given her heart to him, but she came and she gave her heart to Jesus. I was like, wow, way to go, God. Then her friend found me. She was sitting next to, she came and found me. I was sitting on the steps. We're probably 25 minutes into an amazing response time at this point. Camp rocks. friend came and she sat down next to me. She said, "How did you know?" I said, "Know what?" "I don't know anything." She said, "My friend." She said, "My friend doesn't go to our church. She doesn't go to any church. And she comes from a really tough home life. And she came, and so far this week, pretty much all we've done is freak her out." But she said about 5 minutes before you started sharing that story, she leaned over to me and she said, "You know, I really want to believe what that guy's been saying. It's just that I don't think God's ever noticed me."